And I'm really delighted that we have three key speakers to come together to talk to us about this key challenge of projects and the energy transition. That's a huge challenge in Australia, but I know also internationally. And so perhaps if the panel can join me now, and then we will drop the slide and get into a discussion. So thank you so much. Perhaps we can start by going around a round of introductions. So perhaps Chris, Terry, Deanna, we can go round a round of discussions. Just for the audience, if you have questions as we go, then do please put them in the Q&A. And you can also thumb up and kind of prioritize other people's questions as we get into the discussion. So Chris, can I hand to you?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So Chris Ashton, CEO of Worley. For those of you who don't know, we're a 50,000 plus project delivery organization in the energy, chemical and resources sectors and in 47 countries around the world.
Thank you, Terry.
Good morning, all. I'm an electrical engineer and I've worked in infrastructure for more than 40 years in pretty well all of the major industrial areas, mining and rail, transport, etc. I've been pretty lucky to be involved in some pretty iconic projects over the years. Some, the privatisation of Melbourne Rail, for example, Sydney Harbour Tunnel was another one, and some very large transmission projects, both in Australia and also up in Indonesia. Over the last 8 years, I've been the project director on the WestConnex projects in Sydney, and following the opening of the Stage 3A in January this year, I've joined APA, and I'm heading up I'm General Manager Delivery on large transmission projects. So delighted to be here. Thank you.
Deanna.
Thanks, Jennifer. Pleasure to be here and really grateful for the opportunity. My name's Deanna D'Alessandro, Professor of Chemistry and also Director of the Net Zero Initiative here at the University of Sydney. Perhaps, Jennifer, just as a couple of words of background to the Net Zero Initiative. So we launched in March of 2022, really recognising that across all of the 8 faculties of the University of Sydney, we had a shared mission, and that was toward a more sustainable future. And so we've come together around 150 colleagues across the university with industry, government and community partners to address some of the biggest challenges of our time.
Okay, so to get us into this discussion, Chris, perhaps you could give us a sense of the scale of investment needed and what that means for delivery in this energy transition. Just give us a bit of background for people who may not be aware of that.
Yeah, so if we look at across the areas which are going to have to be, I guess, see a shift in the next sort of 30 or so years, we're currently spending about $1 trillion a year across the energy, chemicals and resource sectors. The projections are, if we're going to hit net zero by 2050, that there's somewhere between $3.5 and $4.5 trillion a year is going to need to be spent if we're going to achieve that goal of net zero by 2050. And we're going to have to see some of that spend shift, or the quantum shift in this decade. If we don't see a shift in the quantum being invested in this decade, then the likelihood of hitting that net zero by 2050 slips out significantly. So it's the pace at which investment has to be made and the scale at which it has to be made. And Terry was talking about earlier about some of the large projects he's worked on. Think about those projects, the Sydney Harbour Tunnel or big transmission projects, and just multiply those by many, many, many fold across complex process industries that are currently carbon intensive, either in the product they manufacture or in the manufacturing of the product. And the challenge we've got is, if you look at the companies that are able to address the challenge, there's few of them now, or fewer of them now compared to what there was just 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. And the world's not producing engineers and project managers at the rate that it's necessary to help deploy the capital at the pace and change. And this is not something we've ever experienced in history. So the challenge is one of scale, it's one of pace, and it's one of complexity.
Thank you. That really gets us started. Terry, can I go to you and ask, how does a country like Australia scale up for the energy transition?
Yeah, look, Chris certainly nailed it about the scale of what's ahead of us. It's unprecedented, and the electrical transmission industry, and I've been part of it for over the many years, has never seen projects of this size before. Years ago when I was doing transmission lines and substations, a $50 million job was a really big job. These jobs now are talking 4 or 5 billion for a res, or even larger. This particular industry, like the electrical industry, hasn't got the track record of experience, but in the transport sector they do. The transport sector has been doing metros, large rail projects, road tunnels. These are all 3, 4, 5 plus $10 billion type projects, and so there is a lot of expertise in the construction sector, but what we have to do is pivot that expertise in this area. So, taking, people highly experienced in tunneling, for example, and how we're going to do road upgrades. People that might do medium voltage and low voltage type systems, and how do we pivot those guys into 500 kV type substations. So, in my view, there's a long-term training exercise and upskilling required to take that expertise and pivot it in, and there has to be an understanding, I think, from all parties that it doesn't happen overnight. And so all the risk systems, some of the interface management, there's a learning required both on client side, the finance side, the contractor side. And in the supply side, like we're going to go through, we're not the only ones doing this. The whole world's doing this. So, you don't go out and ask for quotes for stuff. You get in a queue and try and convince suppliers to supply you. It's a whole different mindset. So it can be done, but I think there needs to be a very broad understanding of the broad risk profiles of how it's all going to happen, so we don't end up in contractual nightmares, really.
Harry, before I come back to you to kind of pick up on some of those things, I just want to ask Deanna a question about, what roles do universities play here? So obviously there's the next generation, but what roles can a collaboration between research and practice play in supporting this energy transition?
Yeah, without question. And I think that training and education, as Chris was touching on, is one of the most critical one of the most critical things that the higher education sector can contribute. And I know between the John Grill Institute and certainly Net Zero Initiative, we have our eyes focused on micro-credentials. But one of, I guess, in terms of research and practice, the sharing of knowledge, that bridging of the gap, if you like, between theory and implementation, making sure that projects, as they're practically implemented, designed, developed, and as we work with our communities to roll them out, that actually there's a best practice there. And so that's something that I think the research sector can help to identify and develop and work closely with the practitioners on, as well as that being able to identify the technologies as well. So, we've got our eyes on what is emerging, what's current, what is fit for purpose right here, right now. Essentially, what's the pipeline of opportunities? And so I think coming in with those eyes and being able to meet halfway with the practitioners as they're deciding, what portfolio of solutions might they be implementing for a particular project is incredibly powerful if we can harness that. Just a couple of other things that I was thinking through was also how do we actually monitor benchmark projects, but also monitor how well they're going. And I think that's another area that researchers can really help practitioners to reflect, we have methodologies for data collection and analysis, and we can actually make sure that we're figuring out what works, what doesn't, so that we don't make the same mistakes and reinvent the wheel. And as Chris and Terry have pointed out, this is an enormous transition of a scale we haven't seen before. We can't afford, we will make mistakes, no question, but we have to learn from those, pivot and move on as effectively as we can. And I think that's another area where research and practitioners can really come together and make sure we accelerate this transition in an effective way.
Yeah, so I mean, Terry, maybe I can come back to you on that, and then Chris, I'll bring you in a second. But energy transmission in Australia certainly hasn't seen the major projects that have been in other areas such as transport. What's ahead in the way that the industry can then pivot to deliver?
It's a bit of a new area. I mean, to me, what we have to do is we've got workforce in Australia, and we're just not going to be able to import 100% labour that was done back in Snowy, those sort of things. So there's an enormous training requirement of all the players, how we bring them up the scale. I mean, if I just give you an example, where I built wind farms more than 20 years ago, we're about 30%, 35% renewable today, and I think the target is to be 82% by 2030. So we've got to do in 6 years what's taken more than 20, 25 years to build. And the added complication is we've also got to add in a heap of firming, because currently the network's firmed by gas and coal, or gas mainly and coal baseload. So that's all going to disappear. So we have to add a whole lot of firming in. And then, as we've said, the whole world's back then, you could have suppliers falling over themselves to offer your equipment. Today, you get in a queue for equipment. So we're going to have to have a really broad understanding to focus on. We want to get to this end game and have it, but I can't have perhaps structures of contracts that were the way they were, or I'm going to have to take people on and understand I'm going to have to train people up. There's a learning curve. Contractors have to allow for a training curve and a learning curve as you do this, and so do the operators and stuff. So it's a sort of a new paradigm of understanding that a much more collaborative style of working, and how we understand all that without actually getting some experience. So it's like an iterative process. You do a bit, understand what the impact was, come back, refresh. And so we need mechanisms to allow all that to happen. And so look, it's a great opportunity. Look, I'm here because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So everybody's really excited to be part of it. So we've got the enthusiasm, and it's like a common goal, which is great. We just got to make sure we get, I guess, all the structures aligned to make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, can I just encourage the audience to put in some questions in chat, because I will continue to discuss with the panel members, but it would be nice to have your interaction and input into this conversation. And Chris, I wondered if you could maybe follow up on this question of skills, because you're at the sort of pointy edge of kind of delivering some of this, and what are the challenges that companies like yours face in terms of attracting and retaining talent and engaging in this space?
Well, look, I think to Terry's point, people are generally excited about the journey these industries need to go on to deliver a lower carbon future, and that's where we positioned Worley in that space. So we're actually doing pretty well in attracting and retaining, but we have 4,500 open positions globally. 4,500, and we're just one company. And it's to Terry's point, there's going to be a massive shortage. Now, some of that we're going to be able to address through productivity enhancements as a result of artificial intelligence during the design phase. There's no doubt in my mind, AI or large language models, generative AI are going to have a huge impact on productivity, and you're going to be able to, have 10 people act as if there were 100 people. So you'll address the volume of people needed in the design phase. But artificial intelligence isn't going to put steel in the ground, isn't going to pour concrete, isn't going to pull cables, isn't going to commission a facility for you. And so the skills shortage, well, we need to, we can bring in more engineers and we enhance productivity through AI. The hard skills, the trades, the electrical, the hard skills that are needed in the field, we're going to have to really think about training programs and development programs in an accelerated way, accelerating people into those areas if we're going to get close to having the volume that's going to be needed. And then it goes to, and I want to emphasize something else that Terry said, the risk profile that has historically existed, or the relationship between the customer and the supplier, is often, most cases in the past, not favored the supplier. The customers often try to push risk onto the supply chain. Well, that's going to have to change. We are going to have to go to a much more collaborative, cooperative model that will allow us to focus on delivering the project and aligned on project outcomes, and not end up misaligned because one side of the equation is just trying to protect the downside risk or mitigate the downside. I think in many cases, well, historically, in almost every case, every customer thinks they do things the best way. Their standards are the best, their specifications are the best. And we're going to have to move to a much greater level of standardization and replication in what we do. That means, and really sharing data, sharing knowledge, which isn't something that comes easily. It's not something that comes easily. So a lot of the challenge will be not just in the training of the skills. It'll be working with customers for different commercial models, working with customers to share knowledge across the different projects. We have to bring the community in. So if you look at transmission lines as an example, the communities through which these transmission lines go don't necessarily benefit from those who in communities or parts of Australia which will benefit from it. So how do you define value differently? How do you bring communities on the journey? So it's a really complex set of challenges we have to face. But we've been working with Princeton University on From Ambition to Reality, which talks about some of the challenges and how to address the challenge. We just last September we released our third paper, joint research paper, talking to the things that Terry mentioned that I've mentioned. And this is a once in a you're going to say it's once in a generational opportunity. This is a historical opportunity. I mean, we are reconfiguring the energy system of the world, and that is a great opportunity, yes, but it comes with a massive challenge. But look, it can be done. The human nature, society has a great capacity for overcoming challenges, and this is just one of them.
Chris, it's interesting when you're talking, because what's going through my head is just that this sort of systemic innovation is very difficult, right? Because it's not within the remit of one organization, but it requires organizations to collaborate, and that kind of industry transformation. I wonder what are the roles for governments and for other organisations as part of that. Kind of bringing people together to transform a sector.
I think that collaboration, whether it's across government, industry, or academia. I think the role of academia and universities and research is going to be critically important, because if you look at just from a technology point of view, there are technologies that are not yet rolled out that will emerge, that will help us on the journey to deliver net zero. Understanding where those technologies that are being researched, or what research is going on, there different technologies, how we can help work with universities to commercialize technology is going to be really important. So when we talk about collaboration, it's not just customer to supplier, it's universities, it's governments, it's communities. It's collaboration in a way that we've not necessarily seen in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just going to pick up on a couple of questions in the chat, and I know someone has asked for your paper, but we can put that into chat or distribute that later. I want to pick up on this question about deadlines. So one of our attendees has asked, will we be able to achieve net zero by the deadline that scientists or governments have set? Deanna, do you want? Oh, go on, Terry.
Well, I think just focus on the first deadline. In APA, I guess the signal that they had the actual goal was a signal for APA, who did start to invest in resources and people, and our companies put on a whole, me included, a whole raft of, I guess, capability in advance of this work coming. And so we've got this end target of 82% by 2030, and they've got some projects announced. And I think, you can meet timelines if you hit deadlines, and that means that, a procurement strategy has to happen on time, and we have to be very agile about how we appoint people for various work. There's more work than people to do the work. So, one of the ways to hit the target is to find a more elegant way to appoint parties for various bits of work. We need best for project, best for taxpayers and power players, of course. But having three big corporations bidding for 9 months on a job, if you could select the right party in 3 months and free up that team that's doing spending an awful lot of money on a tender, if you like, who can actually be doing work. That makes an enormous difference. I mean, you lose jobs at the first 12 months. Like you get an early start. So I think you can do it. I've seen during the GFC, big contracts let in 7 weeks for the skills revolution, for example. I think if we're really focused on the target, industry can respond, but we need to make sure that we don't waste a lot of time, if you like, at the front end is my signal.
Thanks. I think that's very helpful, and it makes me think that in some senses you're moving from a project to a sort of program level approach in some of that procurement kind of strategy, rather than tactically procuring projects. You want to look at the overall program and the goals. Is that a fair kind of reflection on the thinking?
Well, I think it is. To me, the supply chain lags. As soon as we can get equipment on order, that's one of the big things on your critical path. Clearly, the community is a huge issue, making sure that, where we're going to put all this stuff and how we're going to manage it. But I just feel it's a sort of a cultural shift across everybody. But let's do it unconventionally. Let's do it fast, not the traditional, timelines that the industry's been used to. I mean, that's my signal, or my message, if you like. We can hit targets if we get a shot at getting on with it.
I think Terry, you're right. I mean, this, we have a saying: 3 bids and a buy. That's not going to work in the future. It is going to have to be a more collaborative, programmatic approach where it's relationship based, and the level of historical mistrust between buyers and suppliers during a bidding process moves to a relationship founded on trust, because there isn't enough companies to address what is going out there if you adopt the traditional 3 bids and a buy process, and that's just a fact. That's just a fact. The time where the buyer had all of the power to make the decisions is gone. If you look at the number of companies who can build what Terry's looking to build in Australia, what we're looking to build, look at how many have gone out of business in the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years. So there's not the capacity. So that means you have to use what capacity exists or what is remaining more efficiently, which goes to Terry's point.
Yeah. So just trying to pick up another question. what are the organisation sector as a whole doing to build the skills pipeline, i.e. building the workforce so you don't have thousands of gaps? For instance, what's being done to work with education systems from a number of countries and apprentices, work-based training, etc. I know there was lots of thinking about this at the recent event I was at, Chris, that Worley organised. But I wonder if people could reflect on, what the sector's thinking about this skills pipeline.
Well, I mean, on the non-trade side, we'll hire probably 800-900 graduates this year globally. Yeah. So really focused on graduate recruitment across the organization. We had in September, the first week in September, we had 250 graduates start on a Monday in our business in India. And then across the year, we've got graduates starting every week. We have apprenticeship programs. We have relationships with technical colleges in different countries around the world, and to help bring on apprentices and put them through a development program. So you've got to have a structured approach to attracting resource, whether it's skilled or yet to be skilled, and then have in place the strategy and the capacity internally to put them through a structured training program. We will link, and we are linking in with colleges. Our relationship with University of Sydney is New South Wales, University of Sydney, Brisbane. In the US, relationship with different colleges and universities, both technical colleges and sort of the universities. They're all going to be important to attract resource in, but also we've got to work with the university to make the industry more attractive, because kids leaving school at 18 and going to university, that we want them to choose engineering or finance or project controls or project management, so they can start thinking about what their post-academic career could look like. And in the energy sector, for the last 2 decades, energy's been a dirty word. People have preferred to go into banking or IT or some other industry. And so, how do we make it more attractive? Well, we make it more attractive by, communicating the opportunity of being part of making a real difference in the world. This problem is going to be solved by engineers and finance people and project managers, and so it's it's really about attracting and then developing. And if you do the right development with people, then it'll help retain them. But you've got to have a structured approach to it at scale.
Yep.
At scale.
I think if I could just add a comment, Chris is spot on. But we have to blend. To train those guys up, we also have to blend the experience and know-how from best in the world, which certainly Worley have got footprint right over the world. And if you focus just back on boots on the ground issue, and one thing we can't do is take labour from the local industry, right? We can't. We can take. We want to create jobs and things, but we can't make sure that the farmers can't get labour to get their crop off, for example. So we're going to have to train up a workforce that's coming from other sectors, the resources and the transport, the big projects. And then we have to blend experience from best in world. So, stringing 500 kV transmission lines, when's the last time we built 500 kV transmission lines in Australia? And these are the biggest. Like, I've not seen anything like it. So we need to have a very mature conversation around how we blend overseas experience at all levels with our Australian workforce to bring them up the curve. And, that needs to be, we're just going to have a blended construction workforce to get this thing done. And then we can take the best experience from around the world, blend it with our people. And we've got the big positive, that's a big program, contractors love a 10-year program. I can invest. I've got time to invest and get a return. So we start that mature conversation very early about how we bring in, workforce to help assimilate and work with our workforce and get them up the curve. And, we'll get the skills. And we're competing with all the other countries, don't forget. But Australia's a pretty attractive place at the end of the day. People like to come here.
Terry, I want to kind of move us on a little bit, just to try and take as many of the questions as we can. There's one here about how we pivot delivery experience of major transport projects where learnings are not shared due to confidentiality, to this sector where sharing is going to be important.
Yeah, well, it's pretty hard to get around the confidentiality agreement, I suppose. I just think, look, my own experience is, I've just done 8 years in large, road infrastructure, and there's people that I've worked with that would, as that comes off, they want to keep working, and that experience is in people's heads. You attract half a dozen very, very good people with knowledge, and then they attract a heap of people, and learn knowledge and experience is not bound by confidentiality, is my view.
Okay.
Yeah, there are certain, software and proprietary packages, of course, but, most suppliers, in my view, want to get a piece of the action in this new industry.
Yeah. So, Chris, you're involved in 47 countries. What are they doing well, and what is it that they're doing? Where is it that Australia should look to learn from, for example?
Look, I think every jurisdiction we work in, the biggest difference is they've all started at different times on this journey. So if you look at Europe, Europe was much further ahead than the US, and the US is probably further ahead than Australia. So the big difference is that there's the point in time when they began the journey toward net zero. And I think what Australia can learn is, I think it's a balance between, make sure they get the requisite, the journey that the country needs to go on gets the requisite support from the government, but equally allows the customers and allows the supply chain to get on and do it. One of the biggest challenges is environmental permitting. You can take 4 years, 5 years, 6 years to get an environmental permit. We've done projects in Germany after Russia invaded Ukraine. There was a massive shortage of gas, and we built built and installed a gas import terminal, LNG regasification terminal, in 9 months. That would normally take 30 to 36 months. Now, we're able to do it because there was massive collaboration and cooperation across the stakeholders, one of which was working with the government on permitting. So, and I keep coming back to Terry, I mean, the challenge around permitting of transmission lines is an incredible impediment to the expeditious delivery of linear infrastructure. So I think some governments have started early. Others in the US, for example, have got the Inflation Reduction Act, which is putting economic incentive in place. It's hundreds of billions of dollars, and every country has to decide what makes sense for them in their particular jurisdiction. But I think there are lots of things that could be learned, but getting on with it, starting early, supporting industry in deploying the capital is going to be key. And so one of the key things is the permitting. That can take a long time and add an incredible amount of time to the schedule that could otherwise be shortened.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question in the chat around, doing it fast, right? So do these very complex projects that involve so many stakeholders, do they have the time allowed to educate, build trust in the community? And often these projects don't go to time due to the kind of community engagement, the need, so there seem to be two pressures here, right? One is to engage with the communities and kind of discuss what's going to happen, but the other is to do this sort of fast to meet the global targets that we have. And I wonder if this is a comment Marissa's put in the chat. I wonder if there's anything that people want to kind of comment on related to that.
Maybe I just, sorry, Terry.
No, please, Deanna, you go. I've spoken.
I just wanted to add, there are examples of good practice here. There are certainly many examples, I'm sure we're all aware of renewable energy projects that have not gone well, and where the communities have rejected those projects, or indeed, the developers have implemented the technology, but there was not community acceptance. And so as a result, sometimes those technologies lie dormant because they're not actually used in the way that was hoped for. But there are examples of good practice, and we're definitely seeing communities as well taking up the charge, who are grounding and doing their own, for example, electrification of rural and city communities like Thirroul, just south of Sydney, which is part of the Electrify Everything campaign across Australia. So there are examples, they're context dependent. So what works in the States or what works perhaps in India or the UK may not work so well in another community, but where we might pair or sister communities, this is an idea that was shared with me recently that's used in the United States, where they actually have a community who has been through transition or is on that pathway in a particular area, and they bring them together with a community that is just starting its journey and share the learnings. That obviously requires a lot of trust that I think Chris and Terry have touched on, but there may be some mechanisms there that we could actually put in place to help to accelerate this and embed the learnings from one jurisdiction to another that needs them.
Thank you, Deanna. So I'm conscious of time, so I think just seeing if there's another question that I can quickly pick up. I mean, maybe Deanna, just sort of back to you in terms of the role of our doctoral students in this, bringing knowledge into this area through around net zero.
Yeah, I think, and Chris, we have a couple of students supported by Worley, working very closely with project management and supported by the Net Zero initiative. So, as much as we can get these students who may be, yes, working on higher degrees, but actually embedded and working on problems that are here and now being faced by our industry, such that the connection point between practice and theory is deeply embedded. And so the feedback loop is narrowed, the gap is narrowed, and those learnings can be passed on in an extremely effective way.
Okay. I'm going to just go around the panel and ask you if you want to make a kind of closing comment, and then we will finish and hand on to the next panel. So, Chris, do you want to start us off if there's a final thing you want to kind of reflect?
Yeah, look, I'll just say I don't think there's been a more exciting time to be in project delivery. Yeah, the complexity, the scale, and the changing nature of how we're going to have to deploy capital is, I think, more exciting than it's been in many decades. So, and it's going to take collaboration across industry, academia, and government to get us to where we need to be.
Thank you. It's a nice note, certainly for our audience with their interests in projects. Terry.
Yeah, look, just building on Chris's comments, it's rare that you get almost a unanimous goal. Like, the community wants net zero. I want net zero. Industry's ready to want to do it. We've got a common purpose, a political, our government wants it. Everybody's on board, and therefore all the ingredients are there to make it happen. And that element of collaboration and, I guess, understanding the risk profiles and acknowledging that we're going to have to gear up over time, and then we'll get better as we go, and we'll reap the benefits with the training is it can be done, and it's just generational what we're going to do. It's fantastic.
Deanna.
Yeah, I think just to round out on the comments that Chris and Terry have made around research and education contributions, I guess, from the higher education sector. One thing is, as we're training and working with our students, is to help to really develop that systems level thinking. Yes, they will walk into a particular project, but that project, as Chris and Terry have explained, is going to need to be integrated. There's enormous level of collaboration here of a scale that is different to what has happened in the past. And so that systems level thinking in our students as we grow them and develop them is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, Deanna, just to sort of emphasise that's something very close to my heart. That actually some of these challenges are really enormously complex and require sort of different skill sets of our students and graduates coming out. So thank you so much for making the time to have this panel. I think it's been a really amazing discussion, and it's certainly given us in the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership food for thought in terms of how we, can engage and play a role with yourselves on the energy transition. So I'm just going to close the panel now. So thank you again to our panelists.